Good afternoon, everybody. We'll get started. We have another full class today for our weekly seminar in food systems and sustainable development. Welcome to autumn. It is officially here, and I think that may have either scared off some folks or there's just taking their time on the roads, as we all should be doing. As the rain begins, we got to just slow down a little bit in order to anticipate the long months ahead. But welcome, everybody, and I'll just start with a few announcements before we get to our main event. Adjust my volume. Is the volume in the back okay? Awesome, thank you. Okay, so as people are just finding their seats, just take a minute, make sure you say hello to the person beside you, please. On this rainy day, just say hello, your name, and open up your poll everywhere. Remember, it's pollev.com/CPOS. I saw a few waves, but I want to really encourage some eye contact. Like, really, look around. These are your classmates, your future colleagues. Say hello, don't be shy, and help us to build community, even though we just see each other for not quite an hour every week in this space. Great, and as you're finishing that up and opening up Poll Everywhere, I'm actually going to turn it over to one of your classmates, speaking of building community, and that is McLaren Crow, who's going to come and give a little update about an important event that's coming up.
Okay, thank you. I'll try to make this super brief. In my free time, as my job, I work as a Pilates instructor, and it's a privilege of mine that I get to work with a lot of brands. And if you've heard of the clothing brand Viore, they asked me to lead and partner with them on their event to promote and support charity water. Our goal is to raise 38.5 million liters of water nationwide, and the event is just a 2.5-mile walk around Seattle, and it's at 8 a.m., bright and early on October 26th, so if you feel inclined, I have more information that we sent out in an announcement. Just kind of feel like the values of this event align with what we talk about in this class, and yeah, if you're interested, just let me know, and there'll be more details, so thank you.
Thank you so much, McLaren, and again, open invitation to you all to bring your important events forward so that you can share them with the class community. All right, so let me actually open up and activate the poll everywhere. Activate. So, a couple of questions today to help us think back to our presentation from Ian Lai last week. Is this activated? Yes, excellent. So this is the low-hanging fruit question of the food we eat. What percentage requires pollination by animals? So is it 100%? Is it 50% of the bites that you eat have been pollinated? Is it 1 out of 3 bites? Or is it just 10% of the food that we eat that's been pollinated by animals? Ian mentioned honeybees or bees more broadly last week, but of course there are numerous pollinators, and so this is an all-inclusive question. I'll give you another 10 seconds to get your answer in. Great, and what's coming through is that you all feel a deep kinship and respect with our animal, non-human kin. It is actually 1 out of 3 bites. So there's been a little bit of an overstatement here with the 75 or 100%. The answer is 1 out of 3 bites, just so you know, okay? You're not going to be tested on this, but just so that's a little bit of trivia you get to walk out the door with. Yes, I see some questions, some answers being adjusted. That is just fine. And we're on to our next question. This is a more personal question. If you created your own map or word cloud about your interests, passions, and roles related to food, education, and community, as Ian Lai shared with us last week, what would you include? So the map that I'm referring to was a word cloud of sorts, where he listed different roles that he has had within the food system, everything from chef to beekeeper to fermenter, and there were many others. What word or words would you use to describe and to create your own word map? Word cloud. Awesome. Keep them coming. 15 more seconds. This is another reason to look around the room, make eye contact, and introduce yourself to your peers, because there is a lot of skill, talent, knowledge, and experience already in this room, especially as we consider the collective. So thank you for your participation. This is really awesome to see. I'm going to review these in more detail later on, and I encourage you to do the same. Everything from private chef to working in ecology or in ecosystems, sustainability, sharing food, traditional food systems, education, and so much more. So thank you all for sharing. This is the end of our Poll Everywheres for today, and now I get to introduce our guest speaker for today. This is an opportunity for you to meet Emily Hovis. Emily is an assistant teaching professor in the Department of Environmental and Occupational Health Sciences, so the same department as I am in. And in a former life, Emily has been a food safety officer and a public health professional. She continues to lean into that work through teaching and research, and we're going to get to hear about a really important and innovative project that she's been embarking upon around food waste and food rescue across our state. And we're also going to, I think, get to see a couple pictures of Emily on her farm, and so she'll get to tell us more about that. So let's give Emily a big warm welcome as she comes on up. We're so glad you're here.
Well, thank you for that warm welcome. I like to walk when I talk, so I'm not going to be as tied to the podium. So as Yona mentioned, I'm going to be talking about this food rescue mapping project. But more generally, I want to kind of introduce you to me as a person. So Yona mentioned my background. So I currently am a teaching professor, and so a lot of what I do is, education. You can see the variety of classes I teach. This quarter I'm teaching a food protection class, which is very near and dear to my heart as a former food safety specialist at the State Department of Health and an environmental health specialist in Thurston County, which if you don't know where that is, it's down South Puget Sound in Olympia. It's actually the capital of the state. Also, I have a farm. I don't live here in Seattle. I live about 2 hours south of here in Centralia, Washington. And I'm very interested in apparently your previous lecture, because I too am a beekeeper, but we also have, you can see our small goat herd. We actually, on our farm, we have the furthest north population of an endangered plant called the Kincaid's lupin. So we're actually doing some conservation grazing, I would say, in my free time. So we're working with Federal Fish and Wildlife on some kind of cool habitat restoration work around that endangered plant and how agriculture can actually work together. So obviously I am a busy person, but what I want to talk to you guys about today is food waste as a issue, and talk a little bit more about kind of what that is and why we should worry about it. My current research with that mapping project, but a few other projects as well, and really like to leave on a message of kind of what you can do as an individual to help address food waste. One of the things I love about food in particular is that everyone eats. We all have this shared experience. Oftentimes it's tied to kind of warm memories of, how we grew up. But this is one of the things that, unfortunately, with eating, oftentimes we also generate a large amount of waste. And this is one of the things that I have a few definitions up here, and trying to tease apart these definitions. So EPA defines wasted food as this kind of overarching term that really has to do with food that's not used as it was intended. And it needs to be managed in different ways. And so you can see here, you can compost it. It can feed animals. I have pigs on my farm, partly to address animal waste. They are a great converter of food waste into, healthy meat. But there's obviously other things that you can do, with landfill disposal being kind of the least preferred option. And if you dig into these definitions a little bit deeper, you can see that we have kind of like this food waste term, but we also have food loss. And this is one of the things that personally makes me a little bit crazy because this is basically unharvested, unused product. I'm going to talk a little bit about work that I did to help write the state's food waste plan. But one of the things that was not included in our mandate from the legislature was addressing food loss, which personally I feel like is a missed opportunity because we have a lot of food that can be gleaned from farms and actually go to feed people. But so thinking about kind of these different definitions, so excess food is food that can be donated. It's basically the edible stuff, like the safe edible stuff we can donate to people. Food waste is generally stuff that is not safe to be donated and inedible parts. And then we have this food loss definition. So why should we care about this? I will bring to you 3 reasons. So you are in a sustainability seminar, and so definitely thinking about kind of the environmental impacts. It takes a lot of resources to produce this food, and so being conscientious about actually making sure that food gets consumed and is going to a kind of a higher level use is very important just because farming and agriculture and food production in general is so resource intensive. This is just some data from EPA that I kind of like to share with folks, thinking about just the resources that go into food that is wasted, and just huge amounts of land area that's used to produce food that never feeds people, huge amounts of water and energy. I went to school down in California. Drought is a major issue in the western United States, and so trying to be more conscientious around the use of these limited resources is definitely a big thing. Tied to that as well are economic benefits. So sometimes when I talk to food producers and thinking about, if you're a food business, this can be a compelling argument. You're potentially paying for a lot of food that's going in the trash. So, if you're wasting less, you're spending less. There can be tax benefits for donating, but that is a little bit of a complicated issue. Trash pickup, so obviously, you are paying for that waste to be disposed of, and that can become very expensive and significant. I'll talk a little bit more about this in a few slides. And then social benefits. So this is one of the reasons why I really got involved in this space, is this, feeding people, not landfills. So thinking about kind of another issue. So we have food waste as an environmental issue and all of the energy and resources that is going to that food that's wasted. But we also have another issue having to do with food insecurity, in that there are people in our community who do not have enough food to live a healthy life. And I put this up here. This is data from Feeding America, which is one of our largest hunger relief organizations nationwide. And they do this map the meal gap data collection. And you can see here which communities in our state have the highest rates of food insecurity. Surprisingly, our kind of urban centers have lower rates. And some of our more rural communities have higher rates. I will say I updated this slide, and unfortunately the increase from, so this is 2022 data, so the increase from 2021 to 2022, we had almost a 20% increase in food insecurity during that time, more than likely due to inflation, and that trend has continued. So we are experiencing pretty high rates of food insecurity statewide. Just for reference, I live down here. This is Lewis County. So now you know. So there's a lot of different reasons why someone may be food insecure. And it can obviously have a public health impact. So if you don't have access to food resources, that can impact you in a lot of different ways, and there's a lot of reasons why you may be food insecure. I remember having a conversation with a food bank operator and chatting with him a little bit about kind of the work they did in food rescue. They had some cool food rescue programs. But he was talking about how they approach their services, and they were really primarily saying, like, if we can help someone so that they can pay their rent on time, like they have enough food so that they can pay their rent on time, so that they don't lose their apartment, because a lot of these things build on each other. And so food insecurity is a major community issue, but there's confounders in that as well. It's not just a single thing. I put this slide up here because sometimes I'll be talking to folks and they'll say, that's great, Emily, but is this realistic? Like, is this even, like how much food are we talking about? And could, this food waste and loss really help solve this food insecurity problem? And so this was some information from EPA relatively recently in 2021. And just thinking about the amount, so about a third of the food we produce here in the United States is wasted. And so of this kind of surplus food, how much can actually go to feed food insecure individuals? And there's a lot that's wasted. And this is one of the things that, for me as a food safety professional, I really want to make sure that the food that is going to feed people is of the highest quality and safety. Because there is a lot of food that's being wasted. We want to make sure only the best stuff is what is actually going to feed people. This other stuff, feed the pigs, feed the anaerobic digesters, feed the compost. But we don't want that going to feed people because a lot of research has shown that a lot of food insecure individuals are also high risk for foodborne illness. And so a lot of the people who are accessing these resources may be at highest risk of getting sick. So we want to make sure that they're actually getting really high quality food. So thinking about kind of these dual challenges, what can we do about it? There's a lot of different things we can do about it. I really love this hierarchy. This was put together by the city of Spokane, and it's kind of modified from EPA's version. But the big thing we can do to prevent food waste is to not buy so much stuff. So prevention is the most preferred use. Let's be more intentional about the food that we're purchasing and the food that we're using. If we can't do that, then we kind of move down this hierarchy to feed people in need. Like, if there is excess food, let's make sure that gets donated before it goes bad. Alternatively, we can feed animals, we could feed compost, but the landfill should be kind of our option of last resort. We don't want to be defaulting to landfills for addressing food waste. And if we look at where food is actually being wasted, you can see here a lot of food is coming from us at home. I have toddlers, so I get this now more than I ever did before. My husband was in a meeting, and they were having like an icebreaker, and they were like, what is your favorite food? And my husband was like, toddler refuse. And only the parents laughed, because if you have ever had children, it's like, oh, pasta was great yesterday, but not today. And I'm just like, child, like, honestly, so this is one of the reasons, like, I've had chickens for decades, and they get lots of food scraps that my kids reject. Same thing with the pigs. And so at our household, almost nothing gets wasted because we also compost. So thinking about, your own household and the impact of what is getting thrown away. But here you can see restaurant-y type things also contribute to a lot of food waste. And we're going to dig into that a little bit deeper in a minute. So thinking about these sectors that are generating the most food waste, like, where does that waste go? Landfills. Vast majority goes to landfills. And if we look at this in a slightly different way, so these are national estimates. So we were just talking about how donation and feeding animals are kind of two of our most preferred uses. We kind of suck at this. So only about 10% of that food waste is going to our most preferred uses. And you can see here, landfills also in the national data sitting at about 60%. There's a few other things, but vast majority is going into landfills, which I don't know if you guys have gotten into landfills, but environmental issues there as well. So thinking about kind of this data and how we're doing, we're doing better than we've done in the past. So you can see composting is yellow, other food management, which is where we have stuff like food rescue, we're doing better, but we still kind of suck at this. And progress has been slow. So fortunately this year, the Biden-Harris administration actually put together this national strategy for reducing food loss and waste and having to do with organics materials management. But this is a really complicated issue, and I never really appreciated how complicated this was until I started working in this space, because little old me coming in from a food safety perspective, I was like, well, we can solve this. And then I start talking to people in other sectors, like the solid waste folks and the composty folks and, the hunger relief sector. And I'm just like, wow, this is a very interdisciplinary, big B problem. But I really appreciated this strategy because one of the things they're trying to do is help empower people in different sectors. And really, like what I just told you, a lot of waste is coming from households. So everyone has a role to play in this space. We all eat food, we all waste food, we can all do better. So I'm hoping some of what you'll get out of this talk is kind of a call to action and empowerment about how you can do this. I'm not going to get into this policy a whole lot, but mainly wanted to give you some links if you want to check it out. Preventing food waste is one of these big strategies. And here in Washington State, we also have food waste reduction goals. And this was really what kind of started me in this space. So in 2019, the legislature enacted this bill, codified as an RCW, so it's now state law, to address food waste and loss, and they basically set these standards. So by 2030, we want to reduce food waste by 50%, and they kind of slice this in a few different ways. And to achieve this goal, they specifically said in that legislative bill, we want you to put together a plan on how to do this. And so a variety of us got together. I was at the State Department of Health at this time, and folks from Department of Agriculture and folks from Department of Ecology and local health departments and hunger relief organizations, we all got together and started working on this plan. Unfortunately, in 2020, the pandemic happened, and all of a sudden, hunger relief sector was like, we need to do our work of feeding people, and public healthy people like me were like, we're running vaccine clinics and dealing with, contact tracing. So the plan got published later than we wanted, and it's not perfect because life happens, right? But we came up with 30 recommendations to help achieve this goal, and they are, actionable in different ways for different sectors. But one of the things I wanted to tell you about was we had one of our first implementation steps earlier this year with the legislature actually providing funding to develop this Washington Center for Sustainable Food Management. It is housed in Department of Ecology, and they have a variety of kind of tasks. But as part of this work, they are funding research. And this is actually one of the reasons why I'm giving this talk today, because they are helping fund this food rescue mapping project. So why am I mapping things? What is this hoping to achieve? So one of the things that we've heard from different stakeholders is that there's not a lot of communication or ease of access for hunger relief organizations or food businesses to basically talk to each other and figure out, how to get resources. So, what food businesses are actually interested in donating. What hunger relief organizations, when they're trying to find food businesses to rescue from, being able to look on a map and being like, hey, who's close by, who wants to do this, potentially is going to be helpful. We did a pilot project in 2023, just looking at 3 counties, just to see how feasible this was. And one of the things when I first started working on this project with ecology was whenever you're dealing with a challenge like this with food waste, you need to think about real world implementation. And so I was like, let's not talk to the food businesses first, because what we don't want to have happen is them get all empowered and then talk to the hunger relief organizations, and the hunger relief organizations are like, we have no capacity to accept more food. Because then everyone gets frustrated, right? And nothing changes. So one of the things that we identified was that we need to talk to the hunger relief organizations first and find out, what do you need to rescue more food? So these are just some maps that really just to kind of show you potentially what this looks like. This is from our pilot project in Thurston County. So you can see hunger relief folks are mapped over here on the right. On the left, these are all the food businesses, including farms. I'll talk a little bit about challenges with data, because you'd think we had great data on things like farms. We don't. So there are some barriers with this sort of project. But one of the things that we were really hoping to do was to be able to identify where those food businesses are in close proximity to hunger relief organizations so we can increase efficiency. I mentioned I'm a food safety person. So every extra day that food is being trucked around the state or sitting in a refrigerator somewhere waiting to be sorted is time for that food to deteriorate in quality and deteriorate in safety, especially when we're thinking about pathogens like listeria. Who here's heard of listeria before? Yeah. Who here's heard of the boar's head outbreak? Because it's been in the news a lot. I used to be a recall coordinator for the state, and I'm really feeling for people who are working on that outbreak right now. Our food chains are very complicated, and so trying to make it so that we can keep food that's in the community within the community is going to increase efficiencies. I'm not going to go into like how a lot of food rescue happens right now, but there's a lot of trucking food around that's not the most efficient. So as part of this, we did that pilot project, and we were like, we think we can figure this out, and at least make a start with this mapping effort. And so we got some funding from Department of Ecology and that center I talked about a minute ago, and I assembled a really awesome team of researchers and students who are working with me on this project right now. And I mentioned I'm a teaching professor, so I teach every quarter, so I'm not, research is not my primary function. So I have really awesome people to help me do this work. I also don't use ArcGIS, and so I have people who are skilled in that area to enable us to do this. So when we first started looking at this project, we were thinking that we would use the data from this EPA Excess Food Opportunity Map, which is published by EPA. We actually met with the developers of that map and talked a little bit about their methods and where their data comes from. And we did some validation, and we were kind of like, oh, this is super outdated data. One of the challenges that we have with the food system is certain sectors have a lot of turnover in things like restaurant-y type things. And so if you're looking at data that's 8 years old, a lot of those businesses that were there 8 years ago don't exist anymore. And there's a lot of new businesses that have come online. And so we went through this long, complicated validation process, and we were like, yeah, we don't want to use that data. That is not going to help us. And so we're actually going to be using data axle data, which is based on tax record-y type things. It's not perfect, but we're going to try it for this first version. And we're looking at different communities that have done similar types of mapping projects. There's a lot of food system maps. There's not a lot of food system maps that are specifically designed to reduce the amount of food waste. And try to increase food rescue. And so we actually had some interviews with folks who developed these maps to what worked and what didn't work. And everyone was like, don't put too much data in it because then it doesn't serve anybody. So we're trying to be really focused and not lose sight of we're developing this map to help people make connections to reduce food waste. But there are some really cool maps out there. This is from Vancouver, BC, and they have super cool things in there if you want to play around with it. This is our data, and this is just one layer. This is actually the least robust layer. I mentioned farms. Oh man, farms are tricky. You would think farms are super regulated. They're not. And so it's not like there's a data set where we can get all of the farms in Washington State. Like my farm's not on here. But this is one of the things that if I were to show you like our food establishment restaurant-y type layer, there's a lot of data points on this map. But I wanted to show you. So this is what we're working on. And our goal is to basically have it so you can click on any one of these buttons, or we'll have cool little icons at some point, and you'll be able to actually see like what's the business name, what's their contact information. We're currently working on kind of what features are going to be most beneficial for different sectors, but I just wanted to show you that because I was like, yay, we have a map. It's taken us 8 months to get here, but baby steps. So I mentioned the hunger relief sector and why we really wanted to start there. And as part of our work, building the map is definitely a major part of the project. But this other part of the project is focused on interviewing the hunger relief sector and actually figuring out, like, what are you doing and what do you need? Because they need to have capacity to accept more food donations if we are going to try to increase food rescue in the state. And if they don't have the resources they need, then we're not going to be able to achieve those sustainability goals of food waste reduction. So there was actually a study that was done in 2021 during the pandemic that surveyed hunger relief organizations. It was a collaboration actually with UW and food sustainability folks, Department of Agriculture and Harvest Against Hunger, and we met with them and got approval to use their methods to roll out a similar capacity survey. They focused a lot on kind of pandemic needs. We kind of modified that section to focus on food rescue because that's what we're most interested in, being funded by ecology. And so we had a lot of questions. Our survey is currently still open, so we have 128 responses currently out of about 500 organizations. So we're relatively happy with that. We're hoping we get some more. So about 67% of the respondents told us, like, yes, we are doing food rescue. And thinking about percentage of food rescued, we kind of got a pretty broad number of responses. So I mentioned that this survey is open right now. And there may be some confounders in here because it's harvest time. And so there may be a larger amount of food that, for example, is being gleaned off farms because of the time of year that we are at. But you can see there's all across the board. There's some organizations that are doing kind of a small amount of food rescue, less than 10%. There are some who are doing over 80%. So very variable. This was one of the questions that I was most interested in because having worked with hunger relief sector, and especially on the food waste plan, I also helped write our state food code and worked with hunger relief sector on that. And one of the things that came up again and again and again is that the hunger relief sector does not want to be the dumping ground for food businesses. Because there's tax write-offs for donations, the tendency is to donate more, even if it's not of good quality. And that actually shifts the burden to the hunger relief organization because now they have to spend more time sorting the good stuff from the bad stuff. And the hunger relief organization now bears the cost of the landfill or composting disposal fees. So this was one of the questions that we were really, interested in. I'm kind of shocked that they had a lower number. And some of this may have to do with the actual type of food that they are rescuing. But like I said, these are all preliminary results, but we're really excited to be digging into this issue. We asked about barriers to food rescue and trying to figure out what is preventing you from doing more of this. Overwhelmingly, food quality. So you can see how the previous question, ties into this one. There's definitely an issue, right? The quality of the food. I put just a few quotes in here because I think it's really interesting. I like open-ended questions. I like to hear from people directly versus me putting words in their mouths. So we actually had some kind of follow-up conversations with organizations after they took the survey, and this was a big thing. Sometimes it's not worth it. And so one of the things that we're kind of realizing in our discussion about food rescue, we had one organization that was saying that they no longer rescue produce because produce from a grocery store is generally, they have to discard so much of it. It's not like, it's right at the tail end of its shelf life. And so surprisingly, a lot of the organization that we talked to, they're really interested in gleaning and making more connections directly with farmers to capture food basically right before or right after it's harvested so that they have more usable shelf life for produce. But that being said, they're super interested in food rescue for things like meats and dairy. And so thinking about some of the challenges with this sort of system, because right now a lot of grocery stores, restaurateurs, they basically want the organization to take everything. Like, we're giving you everything and it's up to you to sort through it. And so we might have to kind of change our mindset with kind of what is or isn't best for this type of kind of like food waste reduction model. So this was also something that came up. A lot of smaller organizations and rural communities aren't open all the time. And so the challenge between kind of when a food business wants donations picked up versus when a organization can actually get it and when they can distribute it to their clients is sometimes an issue. Same with transportation. It's kind of interesting to think about this. A lot of rural communities, like where I live, we drive. We drive a long distance to get a lot of different places just because it's not densely populated, right? So this is also something that is a particular challenge is the way a lot of this works is that you may have another organization who's driving to do pickup at your local grocery store. And so again, trying to think about, like, is there a way that we can reframe this so local organizations get priority for those food resources? That way we're not, having additional climate impact due to transportation costs. So, all of these are preliminary results, but we're hoping to learn some really cool stuff. I do want to tell you about kind of one limitation of the project, which is that we do not have business data on who is currently donating, who wants to donate, who doesn't want to donate. And that's what people want. So in our interviews with hunger relief organizations, they were like, we want a list of who wants to donate so that we can work with them. And we're like, yeah, we don't have that. And we don't know how to get that data. And so we're actually talking to a few counties right now about doing this pilot project to see if we can come up with an integration with our map so that potentially local health inspectors, when they're out doing their routine inspections, can actually ask some of these questions and have that data inform the map. I used to be a local health inspector, and I hesitate to volunteer them for additional work because the number one thing you're doing when you're a local health inspector, it is food safety in that restaurant and business that you're in. And so you don't really want to distract from the food safety mission. But there's ways you can pitch this because if they're composting, now you want to think about pest implications of that, and that's a food safety issue. If you're donating, this was one of the things that made me nuts when I was a local health inspector. If you're donating, you have to treat that food just like the food that's going to be served to your customers in that restaurant or in that grocery store. You can't leave it out at room temperature. You have to handle it appropriately. Not all businesses do. And so there are definitely food safety implications to being able to ask these questions and know who is currently participating in food rescue or composting and why. So I'm really excited about that pilot. And I have another project that's loosely related to this that is actually an NSF-funded pilot project, and this is an interdisciplinary project you can see down here with a bunch of UW folks. We also have Cascade Bike Club and their pedal relief project. funded by NSF. And what we are looking at with this project is if there's a way that we can develop really inexpensive sensor technology to help improve safety and efficiency of these little micro pantry sites. You've probably seen these around. Some of them are shelf-stable foods like this one. Some of them are like community refrigerators from a food safety risk. The fridges are what I'm most interested in. For example, the Bike Club, they are interested in seeing if we can have essentially weight sensors in these sites so that they know when the sites need to be stocked. Because one of the things that, they're on bike, and so they're really interested in improving efficiency of peddling food around the city and actually being more efficient, especially if they're stocking something like a fridge, because we want to make sure that there's actually space in that fridge for that food before they, take it out of refrigeration, put it on their bike, and start, pedaling across the city. So this is one of the things that we're really excited about. We only have kind of initial pilot funding, so I had a meeting yesterday, and we're trying to figure out the sensors. I am not an engineer. I'm working with some really cool people on this project. And I've been working on this micro pantry challenge for a few years now, because from a regulatory perspective, there are some nuanced challenges in how to operate these sites safely. So I could talk about that in a whole separate presentation. But really, one of the things we're trying to do is make it so that we can improve logistics and safety at these sites. And potentially, as part of phase 2, we'll try to do some surveying, because one of the things that we're trying to understand is of the food that's going into these sites, how much of it is actually food that's been rescued, whether from a household that, it's I was thinking about this the other day. During the pandemic, I bought a ridiculous amount of evaporated milk because I was baking a lot. I'm no longer baking a lot, and so I'm why did I buy this Costco-sized thing of canned milk? That could go into one of these sites, and that is food that potentially would have been discarded, right, and ended up in a landfill. So thinking about kind of what amount of these food donations are being purchased or coming from a business or a household that otherwise would have been going into the landfill, we don't really know, because these are unattended. There's some challenges with collecting data. So remote sensors that can potentially do some of that collection for us is very exciting. So in my last few minutes, because I know I'm probably running on time, I want to talk briefly about what you can do to reduce food waste. So number one, I mentioned prevention. It's really expensive to waste food, and this was one of the reasons why, when I was a student, I got really interested in budgeting and being intentional about having a shopping list when I go grocery shopping. So there's a number of things that you can do. This is a big one. So be intentional when you shop. Don't shop when you're hungry, and try to use a list if you can. Look and see what you have. This is one of the things that I didn't get it into this presentation, but I was scrolling through Facebook the other day and saw this really fun thing about someone who created magnets on of food on their fridge so that they actually know when, what is in my fridge without opening the door. And I was oh, I would love that. That's such a good idea. Because you want to make sure you're not buying stuff you already have. Storing food, this is one of those things that is everyone can benefit from this. So knowing kind of how to store food to make sure that it is at kind of peak quality and freshness, but also safety. So if you have a food thermometer, throw it in your fridge and see if your fridge is over 41 degrees Fahrenheit. If it is, I encourage you to turn it down, because we talked about listeria earlier. Listeria grows at refrigeration temperatures, and so you want your fridge at 41 or below, not just to keep the food from, spoiling, but also to slow the growth of things like listeria. So public health alert there. Your freezer is your friend. So I do this all the time with bread, again, picky kids. If I think it's gonna go bad before we can get to it, I try to put it in the freezer. And that way, I can thaw a few slices for a peanut butter sandwich. Understand date labels. This is something that a lot of people don't understand. Most date labels are a manufacturer's best guess about when the quality of that food may start to deteriorate. It has nothing to do with food safety. Almost all of the labels have nothing to do with food safety. There was actually a study done recently that was looking at, people's ability to detect spoilage due to like visual cues, like mold and stinky milk and things like that. We have been using our senses to determine if something is suspicious for a long time, and we should continue to do so. This date is not necessarily telling you if something is safe or not. If you have food that can be donated, especially things like in your pantry, definitely see if you can donate them. I developed this fact sheet when I worked at the State Department of Health on kind of how to do food rescue, especially if you're a business, but also what you can donate as an individual. I mentioned I'm a farmer, so knowing what can be donated is super beneficial, and the Department of Agriculture has a whole bunch of fact sheets on this as well. If you have friends who are farmers, see if there's, food that they can potentially rescue. I sometimes have my neighbors who are like, we have all these like watermelon rinds, do you want them? And I'm like, yes, my pigs would love those. If you can compost, do it. There's curbside composting now, lots of ways to make it as easy as possible. Wasted food potentially is a food insecurity solution. It's not perfect, it's kind of messy, but we have the potential to try to solve two problems at one time. We're really trying to empower people to take action personally and professionally. If there are ways that you can potentially make change in your workplace, definitely, like, all of us eat, so you can make change at home. I want to acknowledge my funders. Department of Ecology is funding the mapping project. We also partnered with a bunch of counties when we were doing the pilot project. And I know I'm running out of time and want to save time for questions. So if you have questions, feel free to email me. If not, we can take a few. Yeah?
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Yeah.
My family, my grandparents run a farm out in Centralia
Yay.
area. Yeah. So, is there anything I should help them reach out with or reach out to?
So,
Because I know my grandmother they're selling a few cows this winter,
mhm.
and then they're also selling. My grandma sells eggs, there's to her friends and stuff like that she picks every day. So.
Yeah, so one of the big things with farmers is I was actually talking to the assistant director at Department of Agriculture about this. Having better guidance on what is or is not safe to feed to animals. So there's been a lot of discussion. If you're a really large hog farmer, you probably want to feed a formulated feed because you want to get those pigs to market weight as quickly as possible. Whereas a small producer like me, I'm happy to feed them vegetable scraps and things of that sort because feed costs are astronomical. And so especially knowing the livestock and what can actually be fed to livestock is super important because we just got goats recently. And so I was talking to my husband about what you can or can't feed the goats because, obviously you want to make sure you're not potentially negatively impacting your animals by what you're feeding them. Poultry can eat a lot, and so if they have some chickens, that's definitely an option. I've had folks give me, bags of leftover garden produce, and so there's, potentially things you can do, but you can just Google it, what could I feed,
Thank you.
Yeah, of course. Any other questions? You have one. Yeah.
We still have 1 minute, folks, so please, if you don't need to rush out, please just wait. Thanks.
Seems like not having compost available, especially in other parts of the country, is a big problem. Are there any talks at the national level that you're heard of to make maybe municipalities provide compost too?
So we haven't talked, I haven't seen that at kind of a national level. I know we're having conversations, and the project that we're working on, we will have recommendations around composting facilities, and I actually have a graduate student that's interested in looking at that, because one of the challenges is there's some environmental justice issues associated with siting of compost facilities and really any waste disposal facility. But we also have some complications here in Washington State with pests, agricultural pests like the apple maggot fly larvae. And so where compost facilities are sited is extremely important, again, because we don't want to be trucking compost across the state, potentially to where land is cheapest. So there's definitely some concern there, but it's a similar challenge as with the hunger relief sector, which is like, we want to basically build the facilities first so we have capacity so that we can then increase, municipalities.
We might have to leave.
Yeah, no worries.
But we look forward to more questions that you're going to submit for your weekly assignment. One more round of applause for Emily.
Thank you.